Good afternoon, everyone. I want to thank Tiger Bay for the invitation. And as you look out these windows, everything looks really calm, nice, peaceful. What could be wrong with living downstream of Lake Okeechobee? And I think we all realize, though, what we've experienced in the past with the 276 dead manatees last year, the death of sea turtles, dolphins, destruction of grass beds, the impact to our fisheries. There is an issue out there. And yet, we probably have read and heard the $171 million that was approved this past legislative session, sponsored by Senator Negron for Everglades restoration, the $800 million that the state set aside based on its settlement with the federal government for Everglades restoration, and then more recently, the $626 million with the Water Resource Reform and Development Act that President Obama is signing in terms of authorization of funding, although the construction dollars have not yet been approved by Congress, to go towards the C-43 reservoir. But then when you look at the water budget of the Lake Okeechobee watershed, you then really understand that the numbers just are not adding up. And I say that because C-43, people thought initially it was going to address the massive releases from Lake Okeechobee. Well, if you look at the water budget, you realize that on an average annual year, 325 billion gallons of water discharged from the lake to the Caloosahatchee to our estuaries. Last year, 500 billion gallons of water. It was a very wet year. Lake Okeechobee is a major discharge to not only, of course, our coastal estuaries, but also the Indian River we're doing on the East Coast. The C-43 reservoir is designed to store 170,000 acre-feet of water, or 55 billion gallons of water. The discharge rate, 9,300 cubic feet per second from the Caloosahatchee out the Moorhaven Gate down the Caloosahatchee River is equivalent to about 6 billion gallons of water a day. So if you add it up real quickly, you realize the C-43 reservoir will fill up in less than 11 days. That will not provide for addressing the massive releases from Lake Okeechobee. Now they're talking that it's going to take care of base flow, that it's going to provide minimum flows during the dry season. But please understand there's no water quality component. And so when you have a reservoir that has warm water, heavy nutrients in nitrogen, phosphorus, no circulation, it's going to act as an incubator for blue-green algae, toxic blue-green algae, concern for wildlife and for human health. The C-44 reservoir is a small reservoir. It will not take water from Lake Okeechobee. It will end up receiving the drainage from the agricultural lands around there. The 100,000 acre feet of water storage, the distributed water storage the district is pushing north of the lake, again, is only about 30 billion gallons of water. Keep in mind, 500 billion gallons of water discharged from Lake Okeechobee. With regards to the Central Everglades Planning Project, that's a wonderful project in terms of improving the lower end of the funnel, the southern end of the Everglades, with regards to removing part of a levee to provide water from Water Conservation Area 383B, providing a containment or a spill barrier to ensure water doesn't flood the property to the east, providing the 2.6 miles of bridging on the Tamiami Trail. But if it's not built in concert with a flowway, water flowing from the lake to the Tamiami Trail in Everglades National Park, it's of very limited use. And so we also need to understand that the entire Comprehensive Everglades Restoration Program was predicated on a specified period of time that the South Florida Water Management District establishes the period of record from 1965 to 1995. If you look at what's called the Atlantic Multi-Decadal Oscillation Model, and for simplicity's sake, it basically is the average annual rainfall since the late 1800s to today, you will notice that the period of record that the district relied on in creating their model for the Central Everglades, the Comprehensive Everglades Restoration Program, was a 30-year period of record that reflects the drier time of year historically in the state of Florida. It didn't take into account the rainfall of the 1920s or the 1940s or Hurricane Dawn in the 1960s. It was amended to include the years from 1995 to 2000, and it still didn't take into account the heavy, wet, rainy seasons in the early 2000s. And so the point I'm trying to make is the modeling that the district has done is woefully inadequate. The reservoirs that will be built under the Comprehensive Everglades Restoration Program are inadequate. And what is needed is a flowway in the Everglades agricultural area. It is Plan 6. Plan 6 is the fix. We need 50,000 acres, 20,000 from U.S. Sugar, 30,000 from Florida Crystals to be able to provide a flowway where water can be stored, treated, and conveyed to the Everglades where it naturally flowed. Where we can actually, for the first time, have a meaningful solution to address and deal with the massive releases from Lake Okeechobee that is adversely impacting the estuaries on the west and east coast of South Florida. Thank you very much. Look forward to answering your questions.
Ray, and we have speaker number 2.
Okay, as Ray Judah pointed out, these are obviously very large issues. Can't hear. Can't hear? Can you hear? Did my time start yet?
No.
Okay, all right, there we go. You're good. You're good. Okay. By the way, my name is Dan DeLisi. I'm the Chief of Staff with the South Florida Water Management District. I do all of the internal and external stuff for the agency, keeping the agency running and all of the community outreach work. So I deal with just about every issue, and I hear these discussions all the time. And what we're trying to do is bring perspective to the issues. Now, Ray is correct. This is a very large issue. I mean, this isn't something that we can solve overnight. And Plan 6 that he was talking about, our estimates of that are over $20 billion if you were to put a number figure on that. So just in perspective, and I'd be happy to go into that further later, but let me talk about what we are doing. Number one, when this governor came into office, it's kind of a business attitude. How do we start solving problems? I mean, let's not talk about the what if we had the perfect solution. Let's just start getting projects in the ground and things done. So this year, for the first time ever, we're building storage south of the lake, the A1 reservoir, the A1 FEB. 4 feet of storage over 15,000 acres. Now, is that going to solve the problem? No. It's going to start getting to addressing the problem. We're building the LA FEB, same thing, about 50,000 acre feet of storage. Not going to solve the problem. It's going to get us there, going to get us on our way. We're breaking loose long-stalled projects. So it's great to build a flowway theoretically, but if you can't get it under US 41, if you can't get that water under US 41, what's the good? US 41's a dam. So we have this thing called Mod Waters. That's been in place, or that's been being worked on for the last 30 years at the tune of $1 billion, and yet because of bureaucratic hurdles, we haven't been able to cut that one loose. It looks like we finally have some agreements with the Corps of Engineers to solve that and get that going. So Mod Waters is something we could check off. Kissimmee, it's another one. Storing water north of the lake is obviously what we need to do. Cut that loose. C43, look, this is an essential topic for the West Coast to understand. The C43 reservoir is 170,000 acre feet. It would be by far the largest reservoir we will build. And it's not to try and store all the water coming from the lake. I don't know where this is coming from. It is to address the minimum flow and level going into the Caloosahatchee River. And it is essential because the Caloosahatchee gets deluged in high volume times when the lake gets too high, but it needs water in dry times. And the MFL for the Caloosahatchee River, the exceedances happen on a very regular basis. And we need a fix for the MFL, the minimum flow that needs to go into the Caloosahatchee to balance the salinities in the estuary. The C43 reservoir is designed so 75% of the exceedances that currently happen would not happen. Now that's huge. That's a huge step in the right direction. And so we can't start picking out these negatives, no project is going to be the perfect solution, but we need to start building things and moving the ball forward. Otherwise, we're just never going to get there. The last thing I want to just throw out there is we've been on a land buying spree for the last 15 years since SERP started. 15 years, and we haven't finished a single project in SERP. That should scare all of you. I mean, it scares me. We have 100,000 acres of land that we have purchased for projects, waiting for project funding to come forth so we could build things that will help this issue. And so buying more land, we need land in strategic locations where we need to get a project going, but we really need to get the projects going so we could address this issue. And that's what we're trying to do at the district at this point.
Thank you, Dan. These guys are staying on time really well, so we have some time for some questions. Speaker number 3.
Great, thanks. I'm James Evans, Director of Natural Resources for the City of Sanibel. And I'm a biologist by training. And actually, Mayor Ruane was asked to be here originally, but unfortunately he couldn't make it. So he sends his regards. He's been instrumental over the past year in getting a coalition between Lee County, as well as the other 4 mayors of Lee County, to work together and try to work together and try to get these issues on the forefront so people can support them. We can get the businesses behind us. The Florida Association of Realtors has made this their #1 priority this past year. That's what we need. I mean, we need to move forward. We need to get people together and get a list of projects that we can support so that we can all speak with a unified voice. Because unfortunately, we've been pointing fingers at what needs to happen, and we're not getting projects done. So yes, I think there's a lot of projects that need to be done. I think Plan 6 definitely has a place. Unfortunately, this governor, our current governor, has been very outspoken that he does not support purchasing additional land in the EAA for a Plan 6 flowway. I think we need to start with the projects that we have on the books right now. You know, the system that we have right now, the Caloosahatchee is very different than the St. Lucie. Like Dan said, we need water during the dry season when we don't have flows, and that water has to come from Lake Okeechobee, unfortunately, because we've replumbed the entire system from the Kissimmee all the way down to the Everglades and to both coasts. And the water, the system is very flashy, so the water gets to the coast as quick as it possibly can, and that's the way the system was designed. And that's unfortunate for the coastal communities because that water gets there, it's untreated, it's dirty, it's dark, and it has a lot of nutrients in it. And when that water gets to the coast untreated quickly, the system responds in ways that we've seen over the past decade, and that's through these, you know, tremendous algal blooms that wash up on our beaches, like this drift algae that washed up in 2006 through 2007. This dark water plume that extended almost 14 miles out into the Gulf of Mexico. As you can imagine, being a tourism-driven economy, it's tremendously impactful on our local economy when people show up from Germany or from Great Britain or from West Palm Beach for that matter, and they rent a place on Sanibel, they spend $400 a night, and they walk out to their beach and it looks like this. That's what we've been dealing with this year, and unfortunately, in a time where social media has really taken over as far as getting the word out. Good news travels fast, but bad news travels even faster. And in most of the comments that we've been getting this year, here's a couple that we received from TripAdvisor this past fall. Titles like Coffee, Tea, or Coke, Murky Water, Dark and Brown, Be Aware, Terrible Location. I mean, if there's anything that's gonna kill repeat business, that's what's gonna kill repeat business. So we really need to work together, develop a list of projects. We need to consider Plan 6, but I think we need to move forward with the projects that we have on the books right now. There's policy decisions that we can implement right now in the interim that will help relieve a little bit of our problems, at least during the dry season. Right now, the Caloosahatchee is cut off when all other permitted users around Lake Okeechobee are getting 100% of their needs fulfilled, and no other ecosystems are being harmed. But the Caloosahatchee is continually cut off. And what that results in is a change in salinity in the upper estuary, which affects our tape grass. It affects all the fishes and things that need the tape grass to survive. It changes the salinities and we lose those spawning areas, and it affects our oysters downstream. So when there's a policy decision that can make a difference, that provides the Caloosahatchee flows when all their users are being satisfied, that's something that needs to change, and there's a document called the Lake Okeechobee Adaptive Protocols, and we've been trying to push for those policies. So it's not just these longer term projects that might take, they're going to take decades. I mean, you guys know that it's going to take 10 to 30 years to implement most of these projects. And the C43 reservoir, in my opinion, is a critical project. It provides 38% of our dry season flows. As Dan mentioned, it's going to address about 75 to 80% of our MFL violations. So we need those in addition to these projects to move water south to address our high and dry season flow, or our wet season and dry season flows.
Thank you, James. And our fourth panelist presentation, Matt.
Thank you very much. And I guess what I'm going to look at here is the policy-making side, what decisions are made and why they're made, as the one here in the policy role. For those of you who don't know, the last 2 years I've chaired the Ag and Natural Resources Subcommittee in the Florida House. That oversees Fish and Wildlife, oversees Department of Environmental Protection, Department of Ag, and all of the water management districts. So we were keenly aware and deep into the policy decisions that go into managing environmental policy throughout the state. I think you would be hard-pressed to find a single person, not only at this table or in this room, but in this region, whose position is, I don't care about the estuary, I don't care about the beaches, I don't care about the Everglades. Everyone cares about all of those things. The question really comes down to, and the controversy always surrounds, priorities and timing. Which thing are we going to fix first, and how quickly we are going to fix it? To focus on those decisions, I'll give you a couple of quick notes to remember. First of all, we are the ones that created the system. It didn't fall out of the sky. It wasn't some individual group. The state of Florida in 1845, the first thing we did when we became a state was asked for ownership of all of the swamps and overflowed lands in Florida from the federal government. The express purpose was to drain it for development and farming. That is why we asked for it, and that is what we did with it. And we spent the next 100 years doing that as quickly and as large a scale as we possibly could. Tourism was not what fed the tax coffers. It's not what fed people at night. It was agriculture, and it was some development to some extent. In 1947, we had an incredibly massive flood in South Florida. In fact, we have not seen rain like that until 2013. 2013 looked like the flood of 1947. For those of you who have ever gone up, for example, to Highlands County, and you hit State Road 70, if you turn east and head towards Okeechobee, you come very quickly off this ridge. I mean, you drop probably 30 or 40 feet to this wide, flat plain. And then thinking in your mind how long it takes you to get to the Kissimmee, where you cross over that little tiny bridge. Now imagine that entire plain filled with water 2 or 3 feet deep. That's the kind of flood we're talking about in 1947. Massive loss of agricultural production. The cover of the report sent to Congress had a cow drowning behind a lightning strike. It was a very impactful thing to the business of the day, and the request from the state of Florida was for the federal government to solve that problem. Fix this flood problem, be our lead partner, and make it happen. And that's what they did. They took a dike built around Lake Okeechobee and built it up that much higher, and they improved all the drainage works, including draining out or cleaning out and dredging from the lake all the way to Sanibel. Well, in 1947, the only people basically that lived in Southwest Florida lived within a 1 square mile radius of where we sit today. Almost no one lived on any of the islands. Tourism was a scant imagination, basically. And so using the Caloosahatchee as the flush valve in a flood situation was the express design purpose of the flood control system. When you get too much water, the only thing that can move water and keep from killing cows, keep from killing people, is to move it down the river. And so fast forward to 2013, the first time we have a flood like 1947, and that's exactly what they did, because this system was designed to do that. And I think it helps to appreciate that there wasn't a nefarious person sitting behind a curtain like the Wizard of Oz deciding who they're going to punish. They're operating the system the way that we asked them to design it 60 years ago. So how do we address that? How do we fix that? We're not just going to throw our hands up in the air and say, oh, well. We do have 2 serious problems with how the system was designed. We've already covered that. Summertime, we get too much water because we're designed to be the one to take the water. In the wintertime, we're overdrained because we built this giant pipe to drain all that water in the summertime. When the wintertime comes, it overdrains everything in Southwest Florida. So the summertime excess, in my mind, is going to be addressed long-term by the partnership we have with the federal government. Conference of Everglades Restoration, the Central Everglades planning that's going on right now, the Mod Waters that Dan talked about. Mod Waters was first talked about, by the way, when I was in kindergarten. We're building the first real project today. That's how long it takes to work with the federal government as a partner, just to give you some perspective. I'll be 33 this summer, for those keeping count. This issue of summertime excess can never be solved on our own. Because the Corps is the owner of the dike, because they're the ones that ultimately operate the flood control system, we're going to have to join with them. The other half of the equation is what I'm very much focused on from the state level, and that's the wintertime. What can we do to solve our own problems without their help and do it very, very quickly. And so I'll be glad to talk about that if we get some questions. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Matt. Those are the presentations. We're now going to go to questions that we received from the members, and each panelist will have 1 minute to provide an answer to the question if they choose to do so. Why don't we start with you, Dan, and then we'll go through the group, and then the second question, Ray, will start with you, so that we'll make sure we get everybody an opportunity. The first question is, there has been a lot of finger pointing about the damages of back pumping. How much back pumping does the district do, and how damaging is it to the Caloosahatchee estuary?
Dan, you want to push the button? Hold down the mute button. Turn it on.
Might start screaming.
Dan,
Yeah. Sorry, I'm trying to turn this on.
Yeah.
Yeah. Hello? Okay, it's on. All right, so back pumping in 1 minute. The system was designed, the Everglades agricultural area was originally designed so that the northern third actually flowed back into Lake Okeechobee. That's where this comes from. In the 80s, we decided to prohibit back pumping for water supply purposes, and so we changed the system around. Now there's almost no back pumping done. So let me put this in perspective. The total inflows to the lake, back pumping accounts for less than 0.5% of total inflows to the lake. The lake circulation models that we have show that that water doesn't come this way. I mean, it is so small. I mean, it is literally insignificant when you look at the scale of the lake and where the water goes. And so that water naturally will move south again when we open up the spillways for water supply.
finish up.
I have a slide that I unfortunately was unable to show you today that depicts back in July of last year with the heavy rainfalls we were receiving that everything is saturated except for the Everglades agricultural area, the 700,000 acre tract south of Lake Okeechobee. And the reason that is dry is because the South Florida Water Management District manages the water to 18 to 24 inches below ground. In order to do that, they have to end up back pumping all that water with all the chemical waste, the pesticides, the fungicides, the insecticides, and the nitrogen and phosphorus into Lake Okeechobee. That then comes down the Caloosahatchee River and affects our coastal estuaries. Just recently, the Federal District Court in New York, after 12 years of legal winding through the system, actually ended up saying that the back pumping is in violation of the Clean Water Act, and so the agriculture industry is going to have to cease and desist. However, Dan's right from the standpoint that the district itself actually stopped back pumping for water supply purposes back in the 1990s. But they're still going to be able to provide for flood control purposes. So we're still going to see back pumping. Now, the federal consent decree that actually was started in the 1980s prevented flow to the Everglades because of the phosphorus. They had to meet the 10 parts per billion count. However, they don't have to meet that back pumping into Lake Okeechobee.
So from my estimates, it's about 52,000 acre feet of water that was back pumped into Lake Okeechobee from the EAA. And yes, that's a significant reduction from what we used to see back pumped into the Lake Okeechobee in previous years when the South Florida Water Management District was allowed to do what's called water supply back pumping, but it's still a significant amount of water being back pumped. It's still a significant load, and about 17 times more water went to the Caloosahatchee than went south during the period from May through October, when we were seeing flows exceeding 7,000 cubic feet per second for months on end. So it's a significant amount of water that's going into that lake with a significant amount of nutrients, and unfortunately the estuaries are the ones that catch that extra load.
So I think that this highlights the point that really bothers me, and there's this opinion in some quarters that we can solve this problem through litigation. Litigation blocks the water moving south. It's restricted to 10 parts per billion, and I respect that from the perspective that that is the level of cleanliness we need to have a clean Everglades National Park. But what that means is we can't use the southern outfalls to the capacity we could have before the lawsuit in the 1980s. That means that that water has to meet a minimum standard and quality before it can go across that line. And so it's got to go somewhere, one way or the other. And when you have a year like you did in 2013, It's got to be dealt with first on the priority of flood control before anything else. That's the mandate the Corps has to provide for public safety and property safety. And that puts it in direct conflict, undeniably, with the values and the priorities we have in our estuaries and our coastal beaches. There's no way around that. They're in direct conflict at that point, and we're the losers because that's the way it was designed to work 50 years ago.
Thank you. Question number 2, and Ray, we'll start with you this time. By the way, it's 1 o'clock or just after that, so if anyone needs to leave, feel free to do that. We're going to continue at least go over one more question. So Ray, the next question is, there are some that continue to say we should just have sent the water south during last year's discharges. Why didn't the district send the water south?
Well, for a number of reasons. As I said, there's a federal consent decree that mandates that water, for particular phosphorus, cannot exceed 10 parts per billion. And the South Florida Water Management District, the Department of Environmental Protection, have not been enforcing numeric nutrient standards and don't comply with that federal consent decree. So they have no other alternative but to go ahead and back pump back into the lake and use the Cluse action, the same we see on the East Coast as the relief valves to destroy our estuaries. Now, if they could require in the Everglades agriculture land to be purchased for storage, treatment, and conveyance to the south, we then could actually have a meaningful way to be able to send water to the south. But the district, the governor, have decided that they're going to instead punish coastal communities with the chemical waste and the nutrients that impact our coastal estuaries, as opposed to restoring the historic flow to the south, where that water should flow from the lake, treated through the water conservation area and into the Everglades National Park.
So in addition to sending it south, we also need to find some additional storage north of the lake, because if it doesn't get in the lake in the first place, we don't have to figure out places for it to go. So potentially looking at the schedules of the Kissimmee-Chaita Lakes may be an option, at least as an interim strategy. Again, these are going to be long-term strategies. Even if we bought the land tomorrow, it's 10 to 20 years down the road before we can flow that water south. The permitted users south of Lake Okeechobee unfortunately have been given a legal right for flood control and for water supply, and we have to uphold that until something changes. Unless the governor were to have an emergency order and flood the fields, maybe that's an option, but you're pitting one economy versus another, and that's really, I don't think, the way we need to go.
A couple of quick points. One is we were in an emergency situation last year. The Corps won't talk about it. I doubt you'd get them on record, but they were game planning breaching the dike because that's the kind of flood we were dealing with. Rather than waiting to see where it just broke and killed people, they were going to break it on purpose in order to relieve the amount of flood that they had built up inside the lake. And when we got to the end there in early September, my advocacy in private, I wasn't going public, it's pretty controversial, was to just throw the consent order out of the federal mandate and run the water south anyway, and we'd deal with however much we'd have to pay in fines to the federal government after that. But to cover a couple other quick things, I do think having more connection to the south is positive. It's all going to be positive. The question is priorities and timing. I do also think that it's misleading to suggest that Plan 6 is going to solve any of the problems we had in 2013. It betrays basic logic. The old floodplain ran from where I-95 runs up and down the coast along the old ridge. Everything west of that used to be floodplain. So all the people that live in Wellington, in Weston, the Sawgrass Mall, Miami Lakes, about 3 million at least of the 5 million people that live on the East Coast live in the protection of this flood control system.
Thank you, Matt.
I guess to answer the question, there are two main points. Capacity of the conveyance. There is nothing that has the capacity to send water out of the lake like the St. Lucie Canal, the C-44, or the C-43 Canal, the Clusatchie River. You just don't have the ability to send water out of the lake fast enough if you send it south without more infrastructure. The second is water quality, as everyone pointed out. You can't send it into the Everglades because we have a federal judge staring at us. But that's why I went over all the things that we are doing in my first 5 minutes. That's because we're cleaning up the water. We're spending the $880 million to put water quality projects in place. We're building the first storage that we've ever done south of the lake. The legislature appropriated more money this last year than they've ever appropriated for Everglades restoration, significantly more. They've appropriated money for land acquisition for additional projects. So there's a lot that we need to do to get the system ready before we start sending the water south, and we're working on it.
It looks like everyone is still attentive, so we'll do one more question if that's okay. This one's going to start with James. Recent editorials have suggested that the C-43 basin will do nothing to alleviate peak discharges in the summer, and therefore is a waste of money. What is the purpose of C-43 then?
Sure. The C-43 reservoir was designed to address our dry season flows. That's to address our minimum flow and level. And right now, our minimum flow and level is about 300 cubic feet per second. And unfortunately, that MFL is actually shy of what it should be, which is probably closer to between 650 and 800 cubic feet per second. But that'll provide about 170,000 acre feet of water that will be released during the dry season, and will address about 38% of the storage we need in the Caloosahatchee Basin. We need about 450,000 acre feet total within our own basin, and that'll address about 75% of our minimum flow and level violations.
This is a pretty big conversation for 1 minute, but for those of you that don't recognize what we're talking about, in the wintertime, as the flow slows down, the salt water moves farther up east, flowing the river backwards, and that changes the nature of the river. Obviously, the more saline it gets, where it's supposed to be fresh. So you need constant flow to push against that salt water and keep it out of the upper river. This C-43 is designed to be a minimum flow basin for the wintertime, but it only gets about 65%, as you've heard talked about. So when we heard this year about projects that we funded from the state budget, aside from the money the state put up for the C-43, the other little projects are the ones that I've really tried to make a priority. It's projects that for $500,000, $1 million, as opposed to $6 billion and $8 billion projects for the feds, that'll try to add up that other 35%, holding water back in North Fort Myers on our creeks. Basically go up and down the river, look at where the creeks are, hold the water back in the summertime wherever we can, and that will let it bleed out in the wintertime and help address more of that minimum flow we need in the dry time in the winter. Those are the little projects you saw on the catch-all in our budget this year.
Yeah, Representative Caldwell is correct. This really has to be a multi-pronged approach. So if you think about the rainy season last summer, about 50% of the total flow coming into the estuary was local basin runoff. It wasn't all lake runoff. It was about half and half at the peak. Start of the rainy season, it was probably about 75% local runoff. So we need to get a lot of local projects to store water, that local runoff in the peak season. C-43, as I said before, is a dry season project. We need that 170,000 acre feet to feed water into the Caloosahatchee to balance those salinities. You know, one other point, I have heard people say it's just going to be a holding pond that'll breed algae because there will be no circulation. There are any number of things that are inexpensive that we could do to create circulation in the C-43 reservoir. There's no way we're going to create something that'll just be a holding pond, create algae, and then flow the algae into the river. It just isn't going to happen.
I was on the commission at the time when Jeb Bush was governor, and we were talking about the C-43 reservoir project. It was to be part of what's called Accelerate, to move forward specific projects under the Comprehensive Everglades Restoration Program. And at the time, it was being sold on being able to deal with the massive releases from Lake Okeechobee. I just mentioned to you, if you look at the numbers, it's only going to store 55 billion gallons of water, and 500 billion gallons of water was discharged from the lake down the Caloosahatchee. So again, within 9 to 11 days, it's going to fill up. It's not going to address the massive releases. Now they're saying it's going to deal with base flow, but there's no water quality component. And it will be an incubator for blue-green algae, because if they put the aerators into that reservoir, they're going to suspend the phosphorus and nitrogen, which is the main catalyst to leading to algae growth. So either way, it's just not going to work. By the way, this is ridiculous to think that Plan 6 or a flowway in the EAA is going to cost $20 billion. That's unbelievable. Listen, the land itself would be about $8,000 an acre. 50,000 acres, that's $400 million. It's between North New River and Miami Canal. You can end up actually creating that flowway. It's only 15% of the entire sugarcane land holdings, and be able to build that flowway.
Thank you, Ray, and I want to thank the panel. This is an important subject, so please help me thank you.
My name is Dave Mulligan. Please, another round of applause for our panelists. What a great team of experts. I also want to thank my friends Hal Tate, Montgomery, and Cog Rocco for getting the meeting started, running such a good show here today. Our next meeting is on July 16th at the Holiday Inn at the Fort Myers Airport Town Center, and we're going to have a dinner presentation this next month, and it's regarding the Estero Incorporation subject. So we're trying to bring some very stimulating and lively debates to you, so you can make your decisions. I want to thank this panel as they've all agreed. This river, this beautiful river behind us, affects all of us. This is not a partisan issue. This is not every single one of us care and want the very best for our community. And this is a very important subject. Not easy to solve, but we've got some really good people working on this on our behalf. So thanks again. Meeting's adjourned.